Jojo was a budding teen sensation, with Billboard hits like Leave Get Out, Too Little Too Late, and Baby It's You. Her star was promising, a 13-year-old girl with a big voice, but slightly reminiscent of the girl next door. After seeing early success, the rug was pulled from under her after her second album. The label owned the rights to her voice, controlling everything from her body image to her releases to preventing her from putting out music.
It had me on a 500 calorie a day diet, and I was on these injections that make you have no appetite.
And many people thought and assumed that Jojo just disappeared. Poof. But she didn't, and she clawed her way out of a soul-crushing situation, with many people questioning the depth of her legacy and impact, relegating her to 2000s nostalgia, a cautionary tale of children being thrust into the industry at such a young age. So what happened to Jojo? What's her story? And how did she not only come back from this, but learn how to thrive? Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and today we talk about Jojo, the girl who was supposed to take over the industry. With a shoddy label deal, her career in limbo, Jojo technically never left. She's been here the whole time, but had to fight like hell for her music to be heard. How was one of the best vocalists of our generation silenced? Or was she? Today we're going to go through a journey of Jojo's career, how she got her start in the industry, her interesting and meteoric rise to fame, her fall, and all of the dark moments in between, because this story gets very, very deep. And how was Jojo able to revive herself, her career, and her passion, most importantly, and go on to be one of the strongest vocalists of our generation, something that I still don't think either people know or she doesn't get that credit for. For you youngins here, we are not talking about Jojo Siwa. So let's make that extremely clear right off the rip, right off the bat. Like, comment down below. You guys have actually been urging me to talk about Jojo for a good while now. Hit that subscribe button. Today I can make the official announcement because it happened. We finally made it to 100,000 subscribers. When I tell you this has meant everything to me and more, thank you for all of your well wishes and really speaking life into my channel and my content. That is a motivation that absolutely keeps me going. And this is only the beginning of the journey. I started out 2024 with about 3,000 subscribers, and I had been making videos for like 6 or 7 years. It really shows my dedication and commitment. So if you hit that subscribe button, I'm not going anywhere. You're going to be getting weekly videos. You're going to be getting quality videos. Thank you to my friends and family for throwing me a surprise party for 100,000 subscribers, guys. I was absolutely shocked, didn't know what was happening, and so all of my friends and family came together to celebrate this accomplishment. So thank you to you all as well. Without further ado though, I'm yapping a lot. Kick your feet up, get a snack. I got my oolong tea, get a blanket, because it's going to be a journey. We're storytelling today, and let's get right into the video. So where it began. You may know her as Jojo, but her real name is Joanna Noelle Levesque. She was Vermont born but Massachusetts raised. Born December 20th, 1990, she came from a family with musical background. Perhaps it was in her blood. Her father sang as a hobby, while her mother had more formal training in musical theater and the Catholic Church choir. At a young age, she was only raised by her mother after a certain point because her parents had divorced when she was around 4 years old. Her parents having struggles with addiction and her mother with depression, it was a tumultuous way to grow up. No doubt she loved her parents, but music was that outlet for her. And as early as 2, Joanna would sing everything she could, from hymns to nursery rhymes, and taking particular interest in R&B, jazz, and soul music. And no stranger to the stage, she would act locally in professional theaters, as well as just hit local gigs, getting on stage and singing for crowds. And as a kid, she remembers singing songs from vocal legends like Etta James, Ella Fitzgerald, Whitney Houston, and Mariah Carey, to name a few. Mimicking their very vocal signatures, she was like a sponge. And destined for child stardom, she was on the show Kids Say the Darndest Things on the road in Boston with dun 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 Bill Cosby around 1998.
Push the button.
More show gigs followed in 1999, shout out to my birth year, when auditioning for Destination Stardom, taking on a powerful vocal track like Aretha Franklin's Respect. Yes, yes. The confidence and skill at 9 years old to tackle that track was a level of foreshadowing of what vocally was in store for little Joanna. And the year was now 2001, when she recorded a demo disc called Joanna Levesque, filled with covers of R&B and soul songs. So it was safe to say that Jojo wanted to begin pursuing a music career. And I know y'all are old enough to remember The Maury Show, at least I think you are. But in 2002, when she was around 12 years old, while the show took an intermission from paternity tests and baby daddy, baby mama drama, apparently this was before Maury realized how successful who the father was, she performed on a Kids with Talent episode. Some positive programming for a change. And fun fact, Maury was the very first person to get her into a studio.
Father. Maury put me into the studio for the very first time.
Maury?
Maury put me into a professional. It was with the president of the black music division of some label. That's who he hooked me up with, and that's who took me in the studio for the first time. When there were divisions called black music.
Maury changed your life?
Maury Povich changed.
So thank you, Maury Povich. And you'll also see her performing on the Rosie O'Donnell show at a very young age, which is so fascinating. You know, Vincent Herbert seems to often be at the scene of a music crime, particularly pertaining to children, whether that's his intentions or not. So he actually reached out to Jojo in mid-2003 after she competed on the TV show America's Most Talented Kid. She came second place to a violinist, and to a young Jojo, she thought that that was the end of her career. There was actually a producer in the crowd that introduced her to Vincent Herbert. They saw her potential and told her, "Kid, this is not the end, this is only the beginning."
And ended up meeting James Womack, who was a manager at the time. He was in the audience, and he was like, I know you lost this one, but that means nothing in the scheme of your life. Took me and my mom kind of under his wing, and it ended up introducing us to Vincent Herbert, who ended up being my executive producer of my first two albums. I think it was Vincent who was taking us around to different labels, and he had a production company. So he was also making the decision of where would he want to bring his production company that I would be signed to.
And she'd be asked to audition for Blackground Records. Yikes. Now for context, Vincent Herbert helped discover Lady Gaga and actually became a prominent A&R much before that point, working with the likes of Destiny's Child, Aaliyah, Toni Braxton, and like we discussed in a previous video, Mindless Behavior. And after auditioning, she would be signed to Blackground Records, an imprint label. And at the time, it felt like a fit. They had developed relationships with figureheads and executives at the label, and everything seemed to check out.
They really appealed to that within us, that we were creating something that was going to last forever.
For context, the label's very first signee was Aaliyah. The label was actually crafted specifically for her because at the time Aaliyah was so young and no one would sign her. The label was created by Aaliyah's uncle, Barry Hankerson. But this is where Jojo, the pop star and R&B extraordinaire, was born. This is also where she got her nickname. And after signing her contract, Jojo remembers skipping down Sunset Boulevard and thinking her life would ultimately change, with the goal of buying her mom a house one day and gushing about finally having her own bedroom, because Joanna did not grow up with a lot of money. Her mother, who had been apprehensive to allow her daughter to sign a production deal since she was around 9 years old, finally felt like Blackground Records was the fit.
Had absolutely zero connections. My mom read a book called Everything You Need to Know About the Music Business, and that's really all you can do at that time.
And I want you guys to keep this info in your back pocket. She signed a 7-album deal, which is a lot, by the way. But at the time, they assumed that she would put out a record maybe every 2 years to fulfill the contract. And boy, it wouldn't go that way. But I'm foreshadowing a bit. I'm moving too fast, so let's halt that there. Her mom, they were living in Boston, Massachusetts, around that area. She had moved to LA for pilot season to try to dip her toes into the acting pond.
Pilot season is when all the different shows, whether they're the pilot, so new shows are casting. It's like an exodus of kids and people who are coming to LA. I also got a pilot called Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide, which was a show on Nickelodeon. Got that pilot, but then did a show called America's Most Talented Kids at the same time.
And the label moved her from LA to New Jersey to start recording. And there were some logistics going on as to why New Jersey. It's kind of random. But in hindsight, she realized there might have been a dark truth as to why.
So you were in LA
Yes.
when you got signed.
Exactly.
And then you moved to Jersey. Why'd you move to Jersey?
That's a great question. The label moves us to New Jersey because the child labor laws are easier to get around. So, in retrospect, I realized what they did.
Now, one thing about Miss Jojo is she had a voice that didn't seem like it belonged to a 13-year-old by the slightest. And that was a major part of her appeal. She was a little white girl with vocal soul, and they marketed her to have an urban appeal, appealing to pop shift to R&B at this time. It was interesting because as much as kids like myself ate up JoJo's image, there were absolutely critics side-eyeing what they felt was a shtick. Slant magazine writer felt the image was contrived and calculated, while others said she had this yin and yang persona of, quote, a suburban cheerleader slinging hip-hop attitude. A Rolling Stone writer chimed in saying she had, quote, has become a role model to suburban adolescents who talk gangsta but still carpool to school and mom's Kia Sorrento. It was getting a little weird. It's getting weird. But it's very clear that they were playing into this image, right? This urban image, white girl with an urban edge. Almost every pop star at this time was having their urban phase. The early 2000s was a period in pop music where R&B and hip hop was being infused to the fabric of pop. And R&B and hip hop artists were charting on the pop charts, numbers 1 through 10. So JoJo was perfect for this shift and could not only appeal to a teen demographic, but also shocking older folks who were intrigued by her voice alone. And in 2006, writer Norman Mayer is saying she, quote, comes off more like a pint-sized Mariah Carey or Christina Aguilera than a hip-shaking Britney clone. And the irony is that she actually almost signed to Britney Spears' production company when she was only 10 years old.
Yeah, I was like 9 years old. It was my first big concert that I had ever been to. I got to meet Britney Spears. I sang for her security guard, and then they were like, you should meet Britney. And then eventually she was like, I'm about to start a production company. Like, maybe we should exchange information. And then a few months later, that was the first contract that I was offered. And that was, I maybe was 10 or 9 or 10. And my mom was like, you're too young, Joanna. And I was like, you're trying to ruin my life. This is Britney Spears.
So back to her development, we all know that she signed to Blackground Records, and they striked while the iron was hot. I mean, her debut single, Leave Get Out, released February 2004, and hit the airways almost immediately, certifying gold. The label dropped faceless CDs of the single off to radio stations and admitted what she looked like and her age. So you can imagine the absolute shock when people realized that she was only 13 years old and looked the way that she did. They wouldn't have guessed that in a million years. The song peaked at number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100, and as her buzz grew, the single reached number 1 on the mainstream Top 40 chart, and she made history. JoJo was the youngest solo artist to have a number 1 single at only 13 years old. Now, Leave was a sassy track that was relatable to teenage heartache, but sang passionately enough to appeal and trigger emotions to an array of young women and young girl audiences. Right now, it's the end of you and me. She seemed convicted about what she was singing despite never going through any of it. Very disturbing fact about this music video. This was actually JoJo's very first time in a high school, but she stuffed her shirt.
Oh, right there. I was wearing chicken cutlets in my bra because I was 13 and I had no boobs, but I was like, I need to be curvy in my video.
So as what kind of felt age appropriate image wise, I mean, you look back and there were still some things that were quite questionable. And you might be surprised to hear that JoJo was not sold on this as the first single. It began this pattern of her not really having control and merely trusting those around her. But let's be fair, she wasn't confident in this record and she put her trust into them and it worked. So it began this pattern of a young JoJo really believing in her team. This gave her the springboard to embark on her very first tour called the Singular Buddy Bash alongside other teen pop star sensations. But this catapulted her into the mainstream, being nominated for Best New Artist at the '04 MTV VMAs, again, the youngest nominee for the category, and hitting some of the hottest stages. So let's talk about the debut. This all led to her debut album, Jojo, and her career was moving fast. Would she have the stamina and prowess to keep elevating? But for Jojo, she remained consistent and grew her listener base. The album released June 22nd, 2004, and peaked at number 4 on the US Billboard 200. Jojo sold 95K copies the first week, continuing to climb the charts, and the word was spreading about Joanna. As well as her voice, I cannot stress it enough, guys. She did not sound her age. I think because when she came out, I was so young. I was so young. To me, I guess 13 seemed older than it really was. So I'm like, oh yeah, she's this 13-year-old girl, whatever. Like, I'm 5. Like, I don't know the difference. Her second single, Baby It's You, released September 2004 and peaked at number 22 on the Billboard Hot 100. Considerably another success. And this track was different from Leave Get Out, showing a lovey-dovey, smoother side of Jojo, again with his R&B edge. Her vocals lightly fluttered and carried above the chorus, showing other parts of her range. And unfortunately, her third single, Not That Kind of Girl, that released in '05, only really charted in Germany, so it was a far cry from her previous single success. Nevertheless, as a debut artist, her album proved to be successful. To date, it sold around 3 million copies worldwide, certifying platinum. They had a solid base and sound to build upon. So in December '04, she was nominated for Female New Artist of the Year at the BBMAs, again being the youngest artist to ever be nominated in that category. They were building a clear stylistic brand and image for JoJo that seemed to resonate with fans. Still age appropriate, kinda, but didn't feel utterly childish either, furthering her reach to the teen market. And she was actually offered a role to play Hannah Montana in around 2005. She was one of the first people offered that role. And it makes you think, in an alternate reality, things could have been very different for JoJo had she taken the role. I mean, you can look at Miley Cyrus, who was not the first choice for that role. But also, let's not act like Miley Cyrus had the best relationship with her role and its obligations. It was emotionally taxing for someone her age. So I really don't think that would have been a better fit in the long run either. But around this time, she even opened up for Usher on his Truth Tour during his European leg.
Trigger warning.
Mind you, what many didn't know at this time that would come out years and years later was as much as JoJo's mother was her champion and her manager, her momager, on the road, JoJo had to play parent as well. Her mom was suicidal and had really deep issues with depression.
So when my aunts and uncles shared that with me, when I had told them that I had to talk her off a ledge when I was on tour, or when I had to call our priest and have him talk to her and calm her down and things like that. When I'm 13, 14 years old and I'm there by myself and I'm on tour and I'm doing these press obligations and I'm hyperventilating in a corner, and she's, after I've locked the windows and closed the doors and made sure that she promised me that she wouldn't, and
But I want to show the parallel and the weight that she was carrying, but she still loved what she was doing. And this brings us to JoJo the movie star. So this is going to take y'all back, but who remembers the 2006 movie Aquamarine? Well, JoJo starred alongside Emma Roberts and Sarah Paxton, where she played the character Haley. Opening in March 2006, it gives more of a cult classic vibe. Was the movie in theory really that good? Probably not. Was I 7? Yes. And JoJo was in another major film called RV, released in April 2006, starring Robin Williams. She starred alongside Robin Williams. Again, this was a genius way to get in front of the faces of children and young teens, really expanding the JoJo image and brand. And at this time, her label was not very keen and fond of her doing movies and TV shows because they were not getting a cut of that check.
So I remember that when I started doing movies in between my first and second album, people at the label were really not happy about not getting a percentage of that. Men were sent to my film and television agent's office to intimidate him.
So let's talk about album numero dos, The High Road. Her second album was titled The High Road and released on October 17th, 2006. The album amassed some improvement, landing at number 3 on the Billboard 200, selling 108,000 units in the very first week. And this album received pretty good reviews. Its lead single, Too Little Too Late, hit the streets in the summer of '06 and had girls screaming, crying, and throwing up in their bedroom at the top of their lungs, guys. I mean, a passionate ballad style track, Jojo keeping her signature sass, but showcasing a vulnerable side that proved to be quite relatable and felt raw. I mean, the vocal range in this song is over 3 octaves alone. So not only do you hear the R&B influences all over the track, but also hearing this rock element with the electric guitar and natural buildup of the track. And this song broke the record for biggest jump from number 66 to number 3 in just 1 week, guys. She beat out Mariah Carey's highest jump, her record for the highest jump on the Billboard Hot 100 for her song Loverboy. Again, this is also prior to virality, to widespread social media and video trends. MySpace was just getting started. So she was getting this organic buzz for the song, and Jojo remembers being so happy when Too Little Too Late cracked the top 10.
It was a big fear of mine being a one-hit wonder. So when Too Little Too Late came and had a massive success, I was like, thank God, at least people can't say that.
And one thing about JoJo's team is they knew how to pick a lead single. And her second single, however, kind of seemed to be a toss-up at this moment, at this rate. Her second single, How to Touch a Girl, which, pause, is a bizarre title. I mean, absolutely bizarre, and they knew it at the time.
All right, JoJo is celebrating her sweet 16 this month, but before she could celebrate, she had to knock off her next video. So we hit the Los Angeles set where we learned how to touch a girl isn't what it sounds like. Dirty, dirty. The song is called How to Touch a Girl, and it's not the way it sounds.
They knew that this was a wild title. I didn't like that choice. While her third single, Anything, only charted in the UK. Now, I don't understand why they didn't make This Time or Like That an official standalone single, even if they lived more on the R&B charts versus the pop charts. I understand that Like That gives deep cut vibes, but the track is vocally strong, rich with riffs and runs, a soft pillowy tone, and it's catchy. But she had been on an insane run for the first year or so of her career in the mainstream. Some artists chase a hit their entire career and never see it. So you have this teenage girl with an insanely developed voice whose singles were striking gold, and she didn't even have to try that hard. I also want you to keep in mind, after this album was released, Vincent Herbert, the man who had signed JoJo through a production deal with Blackground Records, left her without a peep. He left the label.
What was really heartbreaking for me is I'm an only child. I come from a, quote unquote broken home. Like I already had that foundation. People tell me from a young age that they're like be my uncle figures and my brothers and my father figures and all this stuff. And them telling me they love me at like 12, 13, 14 and really believing that we're a family. And then for them to just like jump ship. I can make more money over here or do that. That is a heartbreaking thing to learn very young.
And she was out here on her own. At this point, I mean, Vincent Herbert was the executive producer for both of her albums and was championing for her. So now it was kind of just her and her mom and this skewed label. Unfortunately, she didn't know the implications that this would have on her career. The runaround. So in early '08, JoJo's now 18 years old, and a transition was happening. No longer do you want to be seen as your 13 or 15-year-old self. At this point, JoJo was kind of stuck in this artist on the rise phase. She reached mountainous charting success at her age, but couldn't quite solidify her reputation. In the April of that year, she said that she had an album coming out that was in the process of writing and producing. There were proven to be delays. So in August 2008, JoJo released a version of T-Pain's song, Can't Believe It. The same month, she also starred in a Lifetime movie called True Confessions of a Hollywood Starlet. And let's face it, as much as I love to see Joanna on my TV screen, people wanted more music and wanted to hear that magical voice. But when asked about an album, there was always a runaround and setback. And little did we know, she didn't know what was going on either behind the scenes. And fast forward a year to June 2009, and a now deleted YouTube video, she addressed fans and was very transparent, saying she was waiting on her record label to sign a distribution deal. So for those of you guys who don't know what a distribution deal is, Here's a little quick crash course. It's essentially a legal agreement, an arrangement where a distributor agrees to market or sell a product, and in this case, music. This is what affords your music the promotion, helping fans find, engage, and buy the music. So it's crucial. It's a crucial step into getting your record sold. Jojo even revealed that the album title was going to be All I Want Is Everything. But unfortunately, after some time, she'd have to take some legal action against her own label. In October 2009, she was seeking $500,000 for damages and wanted to be released from her contract. The label wasn't moving. But they reached a deal, and her third album was set to be distributed by Interscope Records. Otherwise, why was her label stalling? She had been sitting on all of this talent. They had seen success with her. It's not like she needed to be shelved. Many fans just thought she gave up. But in September 2010, she released her very first mixtape, Can't Take That Away From Me, releasing a single called In the Dark. A much more mature single, but this was her way around legally releasing music while in a lawsuit. They were free to download and she made no profit because, again, at the time, her label owned her likeness, her voice. Continuing the third album saga in February 2011, she announced to fans that she was changing the third studio album's title from All I Want Is Everything to Jumping Trains. What a stark contrast. She was announcing singles and music videos that would never go on to release. And at this point, I mean, her peers are passing her up despite the talent that she had. You have new talent on the scene like Kesha and Lady Gaga, Katy Perry. Jojo was losing ground and she knew it. I mean, speaking of Lady Gaga, years later, Jojo was very candid about seeing her rise, considering that Vincent Herbert, who discovered Lady Gaga, was once Jojo's executive producer, whom she was very close to, and now he's gallivanting around town with Lady Gaga and pushing her. Jojo knew he was never coming back.
My executive producer of my first two albums was X'd out of my career through like some crazy shit that was going on, and he was down on his luck. And then a year later, like found Lady Gaga and then blasted off on that rocket ship with her. Of me being like, oh, he's never ever coming back to me. He was my brother figure, my uncle figure, my father figure, all wrapped up in one. Vincent was everything to me. And I felt left high and dry. Like on my 16th birthday, it was just, I just never heard from him for about a year. And then the next time I saw him was like in a paparazzi shot with Lady Gaga or something like that. And I'm like, oh my God. And then for me, it wasn't like, oh, fuck this bitch. I was like, oh my God, she's unbelievable.
So she felt like she was being passed by and she knew it.
In my 20s, when I was friends, like for example, with Selena Gomez, and she would get mobbed, you know, if we went out, and I would fall to the back and not even want to be around, even near, so people could or could not recognize me. It made me feel so uncomfortable and less than.
And in June 2011, she released her own rendition of Marvin's Room by Drake, which Drake himself showed her a lot of love for. And this did pretty well. It was free for download on SoundCloud, a 5-year solo hiatus, for real, at least in the mainstream commercially. We have a motherfucking single, Disaster, which released August 29th, 2011. And there were mixed feelings about the single. While critics appreciated her approach to not riding the synth pop wave that was taking head at this time, they also criticized her for the track not exhibiting much sonic growth, especially since so much time had passed. The single charted at number 87 on the Billboard Hot 100. However, it completely fell from the charts in the next week. But that didn't stop her. She went on promotional tours, opening for Joe Jonas and Jay Sean on their joint tour. What an interesting mix, I don't know. At this point, JoJo was just trying to kind of get in where she fit in. Some televised performances of her new single, another small promotional tour, and signing a brand deal with the skincare brand Clariso. Kind of random. But in 2012, she do some acting again, being cast in the film GBF. And back to the music, we're still on this damn third album that hasn't released. She made a note that she wanted to go a new direction with her third studio album, so she released her single Demonstrate in July 2012. And this was going to be the new lead single for her third album, Jumping Trains. But the commercial release as well as the music video were scrapped, even though they had been filmed. So you can clearly see why people started to fall off of the bandwagon. Every time there was a lead, it was snatched from under the rug, and this was incredibly frustrating for JoJo because all she wanted to do was put out music. Now, you guys remember how she ended up dropping the lawsuit because her label landed a distribution deal with Interscope Records for the third album. So we thought. Well, that fell through. And again, the album was delayed. Blackground Records had a history of shifting through major distributors very often and had proved to burn bridges. They were in a lot of lawsuits at this point, and Jojo didn't want to continue feeling the casualties of that. She wanted out. So she immediately pivoted and announced that she would be recording new material for a mixtape. So for her 22nd birthday, she released the mixtape Agape on December 20th, 2012, free for download on digital services. This body of work served as a creative outlet while her third album was still in a limbo. The album garnered attention from critics based off of its very mature content. It was kind of shocking. Jojo on the record discussing themes of drinking, drugs, and sex. Mind you, Jojo was going through her own dark journey with substances at this time that a lot of people didn't really know about, claiming at one point she, quote, should have been dead.
So reckless, and I wasn't considering the safety of others, the safety of myself. I was getting super drunk and high and getting behind the wheel, and I was not around people who would say, what the are you doing?
So let's talk about the Free Jojo movement. Free Jojo. On July 30th, 2013, Jojo filed another lawsuit against her label, Blackground Records, for, quote, irreparable damages to her professional career. I mean, she had lost all ground, all footing in the mainstream music media, completely. Because period, she was on her way to being the next big thing, and it completely fizzled out due to bad business. She had went from multiple lawyers, and they said that the contract was ironclad, that I'm sorry, kid.
We literally had litigators and attorneys tell her, you need to find a plan B because you're probably never going to be able to be a part of this industry again in a way that you're used to.
And I was like, oh my God, how is this possible? I signed this contract when I was 12.
People thought that there was no way out of this contract. But she had a saving grace when she found one lawyer who found a loophole in her contract, stating that her '04 contract that she signed when she was 12 should have expired in 2011. There's a New York state law that was the reason, and the law states that minors cannot sign contracts that last more than 7 years. And since she was a minor when she signed that, she needed to be released. That's insane, because remember, she signed a 7-album contract. When there's a law that literally says a minor cannot be signed to a contract for more than 7 years, that would have required her to put out an album every year. Imagine the child labor laws that were going to be broken just to even fulfill that. And it puts into perspective how a label can completely suck the life out of the music making process, causing delays and clearly being profit focused. And what's also unfortunate about this label saga is Jojo remembers being offered production deals since she was 9 years old. Her mother, who was attempting to move cautiously, was anti-industry.
As a parent, I'm the only one protecting her and making sure she doesn't work too many hours. In the music industry, there's no watchdog. So there has to be somebody protecting that child.
I think it's easy when you don't have the knowledge about the industry to be exploited. I feel like I have a strong team around me, especially with my mom being my manager and being such an instrumental part of my career, because she's not greedy, she's not in this for the money, she's not in it, she's in it because it makes me happy, and she wants me to come out of this.
Jojo even recalls them taking the initial recording contract to a lawyer, where the lawyer insisted the deal was normal. They went through it back and front. When she signed the contract and started hearing the sheer horror stories from other artists that were previously signed to Blackground, a pit grew in her stomach. But they were slightly fooled for a while. Her debut shot off like a rocket. So they were initially affording all of their resources, but the label was abusive. And execs expressed Jojo not being healthy enough for their liking, reducing her caloric intake at one point to only 500 calories a day.
My label actually at the time put me with a nutritionist because they thought they were doing the right thing for my career. I was like, let me see how skinny I can get, because maybe then they'll put out an album. Maybe I'm just so disgusting that no one wants to see me in a video and that they can't even look at me. That's really what I thought.
Being put on injections that suppress your appetite. I want everybody in jail. She kept trying to deliver the label songs, and they never put anything out. The label claimed they didn't like the direction of the music. The tracks would go unreleased, but they weren't offering her any real development or a solution. Just bitter, bold, and bankrupt. So it did seem like her mom was trying to prevent selling her career to the highest bidder. And she even recalls a time where Jojo, when she was younger, really wanted to work with R. Kelly. This was like back in the day. And her mother put her foot down. Even back then, and said absolutely not. Jojo saying her mom, quote, never let her get too close to predatory men who wanted to do God knows what to her. It's one of those cautionary tales that shows the high risk that goes into children and the showbiz and music. It's almost as if no matter how much you fight to protect your child and their interests, it's hard to come out unscathed. I mean, do you think that children should even be allowed in the industry at this point? But to celebrate good times, in January 2014, she was released from her label and signed with Atlantic Records. However, Blackground Records made her back catalog unavailable to stream or purchase. So this is why physical media is so important, because her discography was basically wiped off of the internet. But it was still a fresh start for Jojo at a label who seemed eager to have her and facilitate her third album release. However, there was an unfortunate setback again when her A&R, Aaron Bay-Shuck, left for a position with Geffen Records. He was the person who had signed her to Atlantic, who had championed for her, and he got a really good opportunity and left.
But a few months into the recording, Aaron got the opportunity to become the president of A&R at Interscope. He took that opportunity.
The people who remained at Atlantic after I left had a different vision for JoJo than I did.
You get signed to a label and you have an A&R person that's there, that's your designate, your champion in the building pretty much. But oftentimes those A&Rs are getting poached by another label. So they might leave. So then you no longer have a champion in the building. So then you're kind of left floating in the wind, and that's how artists get shelved.
She was candid about how this move affected the release of her third album. And in February of that same year, while people waited, she released her EP, #LoveJo, that featured covers of classic songs. And in August 2015, she released 3 singles to support her Tringle EP. And this was to treat fans with a preview of her long-awaited third studio album. Now, to help boost this release, because we had to gain momentum, she went on her very first world tour, I Am Jojo, beginning November 2015. Father unfortunately passed that month due to his struggles with addiction. This is something that he had fought her entire life. In December of 2015, she released the follow-up EP called #LoveJo 2. Now, in June 2016, JoJo opened for Fifth Harmony on their 727 tour. And understand, this is not bad or a dig, okay? I'm just simply pointing out an observation. Here she is opening for a girl group who got their start a decade after JoJo had topped the charts. They should be opening for her. It just put into perspective how much her career was stalled. And finally, everybody, let's give a round of applause. Cheers. Shed a tear. Jump for joy. I don't know, but JoJo finally released her third studio album, Mad Love, on October 14th, 2016. A whole 10 years after her last album, The High Road. Child, she really did take the high road, because I would have burnt this bitch down by now. 10 years after a successful album? Blackground, you will pay for your crimes. You will pay for your crimes if you haven't already. You probably already have. Back then, physical units dominated, and by 2016, we had entered the streaming era, so it was a completely new landscape. After her Mad Love tour in 2017, she unfortunately announced her split with Atlantic Records in August 2017. She'd be taking on a new music venture, Clover Music, a joint deal with Interscope. Her previous A&R at Atlantic, Aaron Bay-Shuck, who now worked at Interscope, Geffen, would team up with JoJo again, and he really believed in her talent. So this was a good thing, and now she had more independent control over her releases and over her music. She'd hit the road again for her Leaks Covers and Mixtapes tour in May 2018, but JoJo had some business from the past to revisit and make correct. Let's talk about the Rerecords. In December 2018, JoJo released re-records or new versions of her debut album, JoJo and the High Road, with re-recorded more mature vocals and a slight rework of production. Saying, quote, I re-released these new masters of my first 2 albums because I was tired of people being like, why did you take your albums down off of Spotify? They were never there. Remember that Blackground had ownership to her OG masters, so she was making no profit off of these songs, and they weren't even on streaming services. So she had the bright idea to re-record the songs. This was even before Taylor Swift would end up doing this with her other albums as well. So JoJo was kind of ahead of that curve, and it fed the fans. She tried to keep the recordings as close as possible. Vocals on point. I mean, her vocals were a lot more developed, obviously, in the re-records, and I urge you to stream the re-records, okay? We'll talk about why. But people were a bit split. Some people were just happy. Other people were kind of like, it's not giving like the original tracks did. In May 2020, she released her 4th studio album called Good to Know. Again, co-writing every single song, sporting lead singles Man and What You Need. What You Need kind of gives me something from Star. This album was also pretty well received by critics, praising her on her developed vocal skills, but also her conceptual skills and reflectiveness found not only within the writing, but the sequencing of the tracks on the album. Now, she was set to go on a tour to help support this album, but COVID had other plans. In October 2020, she released The Change, a song set to be Joe Biden's official campaign song. And she also released her very first holiday album, December Baby, in October 2020. Now, as she had tried to move on from her previous botched deal with Blackground Records, surprise, surprise, out of the blue, like a roach, in 2021, they re-released Jojo's debut album, And the High Road, to streaming services out of nowhere. Mind you, none of the Blackground Records roster. I know Tank was on there. I know Aaliyah's music was on there. None of their albums had been released to streaming at this point. So it wasn't just JoJo, but they just decided to miraculously release everybody's shit on a random day in 2021. And JoJo was shocked and a bit appalled. She knew damn well that she wouldn't profit off of the re-release, so she did urge fans to stream the 2018 re-recorded album. She took to Twitter saying, quote, "A stream of the re-recorded 2018 version supports me and helps me continue to do what I love. Streaming the original, unfortunately, does not." Everybody wasn't tuned in or tapped in. I didn't really know all of the stuff that had gone on with her label in depth either. So what sucks is people were naturally geeked to hear her first 2 albums. Because they were finally on streaming services and people wanted to re-indulge. You didn't want to do it, though, to her detriment and helping her old dusty label profit. But moving forward, she released her 6th studio album called Trying Not to Think About It in October 2021. This release by JoJo was described as a time capsule, encapsulating how she felt in the pandemic and isolation, the mental battles, the mental struggles that went with that. And she had a really great single that came out of this album that I really enjoyed at the time called Worst I Assume.
I keep assuming you're gonna do shit that might break my heart.
But side note, in her personal life, JoJo got engaged to actor Dexter Darden, but unfortunately broke off their engagement the following year. She did crash out on the internet a little bit, alluding to some level of cheating that happened. So she had to pick up the pieces of a failed engagement that would go around in the news cycle a little bit as well. So let's talk about the present. JoJo made her Broadway debut in April 2023. Being the actor that she is, she landed the lead role in Moulin Rouge, the musical. And JoJo also would go on to release her memoir, Over the Influence, on September 17th, 2024, where she closely details her journey, her parents' battle with addiction and depression, which really details the generational trauma that brought forth, and also her struggle and battle with addiction, despite her denial of that for years. She didn't want to be like her parents, but she had to face that truth to get better. And most recently, she released her EP, Not Gonna Lie, or NGL, in January 2025, which I reacted to. Go check it out. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Porcelain and Porcelain Reimagine that's my shit.
I made a change and it's happening. Now I'm stronger than I ever.
Top to bottom, front, back. If you don't get anything from this video, please go listen to it. I came across a video where she gathered local singers to reimagine Porcelain, creating a 7-part harmony, and I had chills. I almost cried. But you can tell how passionate she is, so passionate and dedicated she is to her craft and sharing that with her community. It also appeared that she just got done with her Too Much to Say tour, which concluded in March of this year. So let's talk briefly to wrap this up about JoJo's legacy, because at the end of the day, I think there's a lot to say here. We have constantly spoken on the vocals, or lack thereof, in the industry today, and JoJo is a direct testament to the last few skilled vocally. Some critics over time naming JoJo's voice one of the best in the game, with critics comparing her to the likes of Brandy, Beyonce, and Kelly Clarkson. Comment down below for funsies. I want to know your thoughts on that. I really, really, really do. Because she has been put in the category with heavy hitters. However, she has not been without critique vocally over the years either. Some critics early on in her career claiming her use of melisma or vocal runs is too frequent and overproduced. And maybe when she was younger, there was a slight aspect of maybe them over adding to showcase her vocal ability for such a young age, to the point maybe where not placing it where it was needed and maybe overdoing it in some tracks. I can maybe see that a little bit. But like, she was also 13 when she came out. I mean, how critical can you be of a little girl with a voice like that? I mean, she's an anomaly. And it has become so controlled with time. I think of people like JoJo, I think of Jasmine Sullivan, I think of Tori Kelly, even like a Chloe Bailey right now. People with some of the strongest voices in R&B and really carrying on that legacy. But it was such an interesting case because anybody with keen ears, when we talk about categorizing JoJo, you could clearly hear the R&B soul influence over everything that she did. And JoJo herself even remembers going commercial and the label pushing more pop records. Even when she was 13, she was apprehensive because she considered herself a soul singer.
Leave Get Out came across, they were like, we need that song for JoJo. And I was like, I am not a pop singer, okay? I am a soul singer, I'm an R&B singer, and I thought that was the poppiest song I had ever cut.
However, Norman Mayer of Prefix puts it best, saying, quote, as an adolescent white girl singing mainstream R&B, her singles have leaned toward pop to snag sales. She even was like, I'm not really pop, but you know, she's 13. She's like, okay. Based on the producers she worked with, the vocal arrangements, the runs, and clear inspiration, you can see that JoJo was more concerned with soulful sounds. And that's really how I place her legacy at the end of the day. I have so much respect for her attunement to R&B and soul. I think JoJo is deeply respected by niche groups, however. Let's make it very clear. Those with an ear for melodies and vocals, because I'm going to be very honest with y'all, a lot of y'all don't. I feel sorry for you. I feel very sorry for you guys that you don't know how to appreciate vocalists. It's very sad. I came across this Reddit thread questioning how big JoJo really was, which is fair. That's a fair question. With many people insisting that people knew the hits but hardly knew the name, calling her a one-hit wonder and so forth. I think a lot of people saying this were people who were mainly tapped into like the top 40 hits, the Billboard Hot 100 chart. And I say this like I wasn't a child, okay? Yeah, she was absolutely a moment in time, at least in the mainstream consciousness. But I was particularly enamored by JoJo's music, even at my young age, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, however old I was, when she was still putting out music. And as a little girl myself who loved a good voice, I had a deep appreciation for vocals growing up. I mean, I knew Emancipation of Mimi back in front when I was just 5 years old. And Mariah Carey was my very first concert at 6. If that tells you anything of my indoctrination, I was able to hear a voice like JoJo even at an age like that. And even after she got out of the spotlight, I always had a soft spot for JoJo. And I never like fully considered her a one-hit wonder or a has-been. Never did, never will. And so people will be very quick to dismiss or throw away what they don't consider to be part of the dominant culture. But she absolutely deserves props and respect for her vocal talent, her passion, and contributions far after her prime. What I think is the most valuable thing you guys can take away from this is that JoJo's passion for music and her tenacity shined brighter than the darkness. And come hell or high water, she was going to make music. What do you guys think of JoJo's story? Thank you so much for getting us to 100K. So thank you so much, and I'll see you guys in my next video.